Hey folks, Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to a Watchman Newscast live stream. It is 4:02 p.m. Eastern Time. Just wrapped up a call from Israel, and I think you'll like the sound of that because obviously one of the strengths I believe that we bring here on the Watchman Newscast is the on-the-ground perspective. Either I'm on the ground in Israel or we're talking to people in the land of Israel and throughout the Middle East on a regular basis. So an important call that I just wrapped. And we've got a lot to talk about, folks. We've got an active chat right now from around the world, including in Israel right now, Canada, Sweden. Amazing. Florida. I just was walking my dog a little while ago, and I saw my neighbor who will be tuning in. He's a fellow brother in Christ. And I said, man, in a little while, I'll be doing a live stream for people around the world, only God. And it's amazing what we can do with technology today, folks, where I can reach everyone around the world, literally on every continent. I like to say even Antarctica. We have some penguins on their phones and their tablets right now watching us. But in all seriousness, technology can be a good thing, but folks, it can be used for sinister means as well, as we know, which brings me, before we get into our major Israel briefing today, which brings me to our upcoming special on TBN. I want to tell you about it real quick. It's called What is the Great Reset? Technology plays a big part in it. The Great Reset, have you heard the term? Well, picture this. Picture a future where, according to the people who are pushing this Great Reset, you own nothing, you have no privacy, and yet somehow you are happy. That's according to the Great Resetters. Not only that, it's a cashless society with a digital currency, and you must have a digital ID to travel freely, all under a global government. You may say it sounds like something out of George Orwell's 1984 or perhaps the book of Revelation. That's exactly why we are doing this special, What is the Great Reset? Now, it airs on TBN Monday, April 17th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Be sure to tune in Monday the 17th, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Folks, in researching this a bunch over the past 2 months or so as I worked on this special, absolutely chilling. And what does this mean for Christians? I'm in the United States, so my first thought is, okay, what does it mean for Americans? What does it mean for the church? Not only the U.S., but throughout the world. This is a global vision from these folks at the World Economic Forum, some at the UN, some Western leaders. Think of Justin Trudeau, Emmanuel Macron. It is chilling, but the good thing is that God Almighty still sits on the throne. And that's something that we bring through in this special. So that is coming up Monday night. I just wanted to tell you about that because I really think that although we focus a great deal here on the Middle East, obviously, and China, Russia, and the global geostrategic security picture, this is a major, major development that I've been following very closely that I think you really need to know about, especially as believers, as the body of Christ. Okay, we've got a lot that you need to know about as well when it comes to Israel right now. Hey, folks, we told you a few weeks ago about Israel's concerns that Iran, is transiting weapons into Syria under the guise of earthquake aid. Remember, that horrific earthquake struck northwestern Syria and Turkey, neighboring Turkey, back in early February. Over 6,000 people killed in Syria, horrific. Over 50,000 killed in Turkey. And of course, cargo planes from throughout the region, places like United Arab Emirates, etc., and from throughout the world were arriving in Syria and Turkey to provide aid. Now, in northwestern Syria, you have Aleppo, the second largest city in Syria. Before the Syrian civil war, Aleppo may have had the largest population, even more than Damascus. Don't quote me on that, but they're 1-2, Damascus and Aleppo. But Aleppo Airport was the main transit point, or has been over the past 2 months, for people bringing aid into Syria. Now, many of these countries, obviously most of them, have only good intentions. They want to help people who were devastated by this horrific, massive earthquake. But then you have the Iranian regime, which has obviously had a presence in Syria now for years, since the onset of this Syrian civil war back in 2011. You have the Iranian regime, and they had a different idea of what constitutes aid in Syria. It wasn't humanitarian aid for suffering Syrians. Oh, no. The Iranian regime has used the chaos on the ground there in northwestern Syria to send cargo planes filled with military equipment into Syria. Two reasons here. Number one, to bolster the forces of Bashar al-Assad, Iran's ally, the Syrian dictator. Secondly, to bolster Iran's own forces in Syria, which include Hezbollah, at Israel's doorstep. Now, Israel talked about this at the onset of the earthquake and said, look, we know what you're up to. We see what you are doing, Iran. And if you continue to do it, to take advantage of a horrific tragedy on the ground in Syria, then we're going to be forced to act. And as we reported here in the newscast about a week or two ago, I believe about 2 weeks ago, Israel has struck Aleppo International Airport in recent weeks, clearly targeting Iranian weapons shipments that are coming through that airport. Now, in the comments section, which is always very lively, and we've got a very lively chat here today, and our comments under every newscast, many of them are anti-Israel and accusatory that I don't know what I'm talking about, and where's your proof that Iran would do that? Call me crazy, folks. I don't think it takes a brain surgeon to surmise that maybe the Iranian regime would do something very nefarious and take advantage of an earthquake to transit weapons into Syria. Seems to fit with the Iranian regime's MO the past 44 years. So it wasn't a hop, skip, and a jump to deduce, and especially with Israeli intel saying the same thing, that, yeah, Iran's probably doing it. The mullahs in Tehran, not the Iranian people who are the main victims of this tyrannical regime, but the mullahs in Tehran, Ayatollah Khamenei, Raisi, the Revolutionary Guards Corps on down. Folks, this fits their MO. Of course, they were taking advantage of the situation in Syria to transit weapons into that country at Israel's doorstep. Again, it doesn't take a brain surgeon. Now we have a very interesting report that I want to quote from you from directly out of Reuters today with some good, and I'm not, a big Reuters guy, but this is a very well-sourced piece, and I'm just looking down at my phone here because I am going to read it to you directly about, I would say, confirmation of these Iranian weapon shipments. The title: Iran transferred weapons into Syria under cover of earthquake aid flights. Sources tell Reuters that Tehran saw, quote, God's help in a chance to move arms and restock quantities lost in previous Israeli drone strikes. Very interesting. So what Iran saw was a chance to replenish what they had lost from Israel consistently striking at them in Syria. The piece says that 9 Syrian, Iranian, Israeli, and Western sources told the Reuters news agency that the weaponry was to, quote, buttress Iran's defenses against Israel in Syria, as well as to bolster Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, a key ally of Tehran. Now, the report said the equipment that Iran covertly brought into Syria under the guise of earthquake aid included advanced communications equipment and radar batteries, as well as spare parts required for Syria's air defense system that was provided by Iran, and more. Reuters says that its sources for the report included Western intelligence officials, sources close to the Iranian and Israeli leadership, a Syrian military defector, and a serving Syrian officer currently serving in the regime of Bashar al-Assad. Folks, it's a well-sourced piece. But no proof at all. Sure. The sources told Reuters, I continue to quote, I'm looking down just at my phone here, I don't want to misquote. The sources told Reuters that Israeli defense officials became aware soon after the earthquake that Tehran was exploiting the situation, surprise, surprise, to transfer weapons. Under the guise of shipments of earthquake aid to Syria, Israel has seen significant movements of military equipment from Iran, mainly transported in parts, an Israeli defense official told Reuters. The official said that most of the military equipment was sent to Aleppo Airport, adding that it was organized by the Syrian division of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Quds Force under the leadership of Hassan Mehdoui. The official said ground transportation of the weapons was then undertaken by the Quds force led by Bahanem Shahariri. Cargo planes quickly began to arrive at Aleppo from Iran after the earthquake. They were supervised by none other than Esmail Ghani, who's the leader of the Revolutionary Guards Corps Quds Force, who was the replacement for the not so dearly departed terror master Qasem Soleimani. So, folks, you've got a lot of really primary sources here naming names, people on the ground in Syria. So this is an exhaustive piece, exhaustive in a good way. To me, not that Israel needed it, not that any of our viewers needed it, but you could say a smoking gun, no pun intended, in a sense, when it comes to Iran taking advantage of the earthquake in Syria. See if there's anything else I want to share with you here. That quote about God, a gift from God, or Allah, as Iran would call their God. The quake, says an Iranian source, tells Reuters, someone close to Iran's clerical leadership. Last thing I'll say here from this piece. The quake was a sad disaster, but at the same time, it was Allah's help to us to help our brothers in Syria in their fight against their enemies, meaning Israel and the U.S. Loads of weapons were sent to Syria immediately. Loads of weapons were sent to Syria immediately, according to a source close to Iran's clerical leadership, a.k.a. Ayatollah Khamenei, Raisi, and the rest. So, folks, there you have it. I hope you followed with me there. I know that's a lot from that piece. It's a long piece, a very detailed piece. But in case there were any doubters, there you go. That's a very, Israel at first said, hey, they're doing this right away. I mean, that earthquake happened. Gosh, I don't have the exact date in front of me. Was it February 3rd, February 5th? Anyone want to do a quick search and comment here? But it was early February, first week of February. I mean, Israel was talking about this literally days after. Days after. Hey, wait a minute. We're noticing something here. That cargo planes are arriving from Iran under the guise, they're saying it's earthquake aid, but it's not. And Israel right away laid down the warning. I mean, right away. And now this Iranian source close to Iran's leadership says, yeah, quote, loads of weapons we poured into Syria in the wake of the quake. So, folks, very interesting development. Needless to say, I don't think anyone watching here, if you have any ounce of discernment, which I know you do, if you're here with us on the channel, especially for our live streams, I don't think you're surprised. And by the way, if you're here for the first time, you like what you're hearing, be sure to subscribe to the Watchman News channel right here on YouTube. Click the notification bell, give us a thumbs up. Folks, we do the live streams once per week, usually on Wednesdays for a solid hour or thereabouts. We also take questions from our viewers during the live stream. So be sure to send along your questions. We will wrap up the live stream today with a Q&A session. But hey, for such a time as this, as we like to say here on the news channel, we are coming to you every single day with breaking news from Israel, the Middle East, and beyond, and how it affects you no matter where you live. So no matter where you are in the world, we are glad that you are with us right now. Let's see who we have with us right now. We've got people around the world, but real quick, thousands watching. Good to see, because, folks, man, oh, man, things are happening right now in the region. Now, I wanted to lay out the earthquake aid story for you right away because, again, we posted about it several times here on the channel over the past month or two, and also some of our YouTube shorts and on Instagram as well, some of our reels. Hey, Instagram as well, Erick.Stakelbeck. We're posting some good stuff there. But some of the commenters, again, mostly from the Arab and Muslim world, were saying, where's your proof? Iran's not doing this. It's all a lie. Well, I don't know how much proof you need, but we just laid out a pretty good amount of it. So with sources, by the way, from Iran, Israel, the region, Syria, and elsewhere. But there you go. Because of all that, it's something we've been talking about. I wanted to drop that first. Okay, here's the state of play. Over the past week, obviously, past 8 days, really, since last Tuesday, we've had a very tumultuous, dangerous situation in Israel. Not just for the past 8 days, really, as the demonstrations have raged for the better part of 2 months. And we've talked about this here. Israel's enemies have been observing this very closely, folks. They've been taking notes, and they're taking notes They smell blood in the water. They're salivating at the thought of a divided Israel. Tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of demonstrators out in the streets protesting against the government of Benjamin Netanyahu, which just came back into office in late December, early January. And right away, I mean, almost simultaneously, the protest began over the Netanyahu government's efforts to reform Israel's judiciary. Now, we've gone through this previously on live streams and newscasts, what it's all about. Needless to say, long story short, Bibi and his government believe that Israel's judiciary is dominated by the left too much, and that there isn't any room for conservative voices there. Not only that, the judges pick themselves, and there's really no government oversight over Israel's Supreme Court. Bibi, his government, they want to change that. There's been fierce opposition from the left, and there's been massive demonstrations. They've died down a bit, but there were certainly in March, especially, some very large demonstrations in Israel, especially in Tel Aviv, in that area. Now, the demonstrations have not stopped. Even in the wake of a terror onslaught in the past 8 days, which we'll talk about in a minute, these demonstrations have continued. And folks, I just mentioned a minute ago, Israel's enemies are watching. They see discord, they see disunity, much as America's enemies see right now here in the United States. But in Israel's case, those enemies are quite literally not only at the gates, they're inside the gates as well. And what I believe we've seen over the past few weeks is probing and dry runs from Israel's enemies. I think it really started in earnest a few weeks ago when Hezbollah planted a bomb in northern Israel at Megiddo Junction, which is usually very crowded. I've been there many times, driven through there. Only one person was hurt. We prayed for him and his family. I hope he's okay now. I don't have an update on his condition. But this was intended to be a mass casualty attack by Hezbollah. You might say, wow. And at the same time, by the way, a few days before, Iran launched a drone attack against a U.S. base in Syria, killing a U.S. citizen. A U.S. contractor was there, and wounding some 6 U.S. soldiers. Back to back, these incidents happened. You might say, wow, that's pretty bold of Iran. Not only to do that in Syria, but to clearly direct its proxy Hezbollah to plant a massive bomb in northern Israel. Why now? Especially in the case of Hezbollah. Look, Israel's northern border vis-a-vis Hezbollah has been mostly, not entirely, mostly quiet over the past 17 years, ever since that 2006 war between Israel and Hezbollah, which is known as the Second Lebanon War. So you might say, why all of a sudden would Hezbollah take such a bold step? Hey, folks, listen, dozens of people, maybe more, could have been killed as a result of this bomb that was planted. Killed, wounded, mass carnage, no doubt. Why now? All of a sudden, Hezbollah gets bold and does this? Folks, look, if the attack was successful, it could have led to a war. In today's Middle East, expect the unexpected. You might say, well, they planted one bomb, and that's going to lead to a major war. Yeah, it could. If dozens of Israelis were wounded, injured, Israel would have to respond against Hezbollah directly, no doubt. The 2006 war began when Hezbollah, in a severe miscalculation, and that's Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, saying that after that war wrapped, he said, wow, we didn't quite expect Israel to react so strongly. Hezbollah kidnapped 2 Israeli soldiers along that Israel-Lebanon border. So yeah, Israel reacted quite strongly, and that war lasted for over 30 days in the summer of 2006. So who knows how Israel would have reacted if this bombing had the kind of results that Hezbollah clearly wanted. So Hezbollah playing with fire. But why? Why take such a risk now, especially when Iran has been holding Hezbollah in reserve for 17 years, waiting for the right moment to unleash its most dangerous proxy? Because Iran smells weakness. And Iran's saying, the U.S. clearly divided, then we know they're not going to react in any meaningful way to this drone strike. And listen, since Joe Biden took office in January 2021, there have been at least 78, count them folks, 78 attacks launched by Iran and its proxies against U.S. forces in Syria and Iraq. The Biden administration has responded exactly 3 times with airstrikes, and some Iranian proxies were killed in those strikes, and they weren't completely ineffective, but they were limited. And Iran clearly didn't get the memo, and they clearly don't believe that the Biden administration has any follow-through behind those strikes. And why would they? We've got reports right now, and we discussed this on last week's live stream, that the Biden administration is once again looking to revive the Iran nuclear deal in some capacity. So, of course, Iran is saying, we've got these guys. They're not going to hit us militarily in any meaningful way. We'll take some short-term lumps for the greater good of our cause. That's what they think of the U.S. right now. They see weakness in Washington, and rightfully. In Israel, they see a nation divided. A house divided against itself cannot stand. You've heard it many times. Jesus said it, and it's true. Now, Israel has always united in the face of external threats, and I believe that will happen again. But folks, even after this onslaught, we'll recap it in a minute, the demonstrations have continued, not to the magnitude that they were, but man, oh man. The bombs planted in Israel a few weeks ago. Ramadan began a few weeks ago. It ends on April 21st. Ramadan, always a time, sadly, of increased terror, especially in Jerusalem and on the Temple Mount. But it was mostly quiet on the Temple Mount and at the Al-Aqsa Mosque for the first several days of Ramadan. And then last week hits on the eve of Passover. No coincidence. Last Tuesday, Passover Eve. It all starts in Jerusalem. And by the way, it all ends in Jerusalem at the end of the day, where Jesus plants his foot on the Mount of Olives, not in Washington, D.C., Berlin, London, or Beijing, but in Jerusalem, his city. But this latest round of hostilities all began in Jerusalem last Tuesday when hundreds of young Palestinians, at the urging of Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Iranian proxies both, barricaded themselves inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque, armed with rocks, bottles, firecrackers, Molotov cocktails, with the intention to attack Jews who visited the Temple Mount and who worshiped at the Western Wall below. The Israeli police said, that's a non-starter. We can't have it. So we are going to go into the mosque. We don't want to, but we have no choice because they're using their holy site, a site they consider holy, as a weapons depot. I saw Ron Dermer, Israel's strategic affairs minister, yesterday, interviewed by our good friend Chris Mitchell at CBN News. And he said, you know, at your church or at my synagogue, we don't do that. We're not storing weapons in the back of the church or in the synagogue. But sadly, the place that Muslims consider the third holiest site in Islam, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, is being used time and time again over the past few years as a weapons depot. And Israeli police say, well, if we don't go in, they could carry out attacks and cause havoc. If we do go in, it's going to be chaos and havoc as well, and the world's going to howl. But we'd rather preserve Israeli lives, innocent lives, so let's go in. So they went in, and Hamas and Islamic Jihad used that as a pretext. They instigated the entire affair atop the Temple Mount. They did it 2 years ago, which led to an 11-day war in May 2021. They instigated the entire affair. They knew that Israel's police would eventually have to respond. They did respond. Hamas and Islamic Jihad howled and told the world that the Jews are desecrating Al-Aqsa. They're beating innocent Palestinians who are just trying to worship in Al-Aqsa. And folks, look, back to the comments on the newscast. There are so many misinformed people, some misinformed, some willfully blind, who see what they want to see, who see that Israel is the problem, Israel's the enemy, and everything Israel does is wrong. But it's been interesting to observe this over the past 8 days. People saying, what are you talking about? It was all the Israelis storming the Al-Aqsa Mosque and roughing up innocent worshipers. Yeah, innocent worshipers, quote unquote, with Molotov cocktails and large rocks in their hands and fireworks that they're going to set off at people, pointing them at people on the Temple Mount. So it's interesting. There's the truth, and then there's the truth. And we try to bring you the real truth here on the Watchman Newscast, needless to say. But that's how this thing really started, folks. And when it comes to Jerusalem, Hamas calls itself the guardian of Al-Aqsa, the guardian of Al-Quds, which they call Jerusalem Al-Quds. And they use it as a cudgel time and time again to hit Israel with and to instigate hostilities against Israel. If there's one way to rile up the Muslim world during Ramadan, make it about Al-Aqsa, make it about Al-Quds, Jerusalem. And that's what Hamas has done. They're not stupid. They're very strategic in what they're doing. Folks, keep an eye on Jerusalem and Syria. Prophetically, keep an eye on Jerusalem and Syria, because many prophetic events are going to go down in those two places in the days to come. Jerusalem is the center of the world geographically. It's also the center of, literally, look at a map. It's literally the center of the world geographically. I'm sure it's just a coincidence. It's also the center of God's prophetic plan. So it started in Jerusalem. Al-Aqsa has been defiled, and there you go. And then we're off to the jihadist races with, number one, rockets being launched out of Lebanon last Thursday. First rockets out of Gaza, Hamas's home base. It started out of Gaza, as it usually does. Dozens of rockets launched. 34 rockets launched out of Lebanon, southern Lebanon. We haven't seen such a big onslaught out of southern Lebanon again since 2006. And then 44 more rockets launched by Hamas out of Gaza on Friday. Then Saturday night, some 6 rockets launched out of Syria on the Syrian side of the Golan Heights into the Israeli side of the Golan. Thankfully, no Israelis were hurt in that onslaught. A few were hurt from the rockets coming out of Lebanon. None hurt that I know of in the south with the Gaza onslaught. Iron Dome, Israel's missile defense system, intercepted a lot of these rockets, took them out midair before they were able to reach their targets. But 3 fronts: Gaza, Lebanon, and Syria. And then the internal front, Jerusalem, and then Judea and Samaria. We had 2 horrific terror attacks. Well, one in Samaria, a mother and her 2 daughters murdered by Palestinian terrorists. And also in Tel Aviv, a car ramming, a 35-year-old Italian tourist killed in a car ramming, 7 other people wounded. We had all of that internal offensive against Israel, then obviously external. When you think of Syria, Lebanon, Gaza, encircling Israel, right to the south, to the north, it's the ring of fire. And we've talked about it many times here on the news channel, folks. Why now for all 3? Lebanon and the other 2, probing, ring of fire, activated. It will be activated in a major way in the days to come. More on that in a minute. But bear this in mind about southern Lebanon. This was Hamas that launched these rockets out of southern Lebanon. And a few people commented and said, Hamas, what are you talking about? They're in Gaza, they're in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria to a degree. But Lebanon, that's southern Lebanon, that's Hezbollah country. Yeah, it is. And Hezbollah has allowed Hamas over the past few years to also build up infrastructure, terror infrastructure in southern Lebanon under Hezbollah's watchful eye. It should come as no surprise to anyone that Hezbollah and Hamas have a very, very cozy relationship. These are both Iranian proxies devoted to Israel's destruction, so of course they work together. The Sunni-Shia difference is out the window when it comes to the Zionist entity and opposing the so-called Zionist entity. So yes, Hamas has a presence in southern Lebanon as well. Gaza, Lebanon, Syria. 3 rings on the ring of fire activated, not simultaneously. We had Lebanon Thursday, Gaza Friday, Syria Saturday. Not simultaneously. But a day is coming where Iran will activate all of these proxies simultaneously on Israel's borders. Tens of thousands, really hundreds of thousands of rockets and missiles, some precision guided, along with attack drones. And that ring of fire will be activated simultaneously on all sides. Clearly what Iran did last weekend, or late last week, was a probe and a dry run. How will Israel respond? Hey, they're saying we've been waiting for this moment. Tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of Israelis in the streets protesting their government. They're at each other's throats. Bibi was even saying, look, I'm going to have a temporary pause to the judicial reform because I don't want a civil war. I mean, that's serious talk. And sadly, Israeli opposition leaders saying this could be, basically in so many words, I'm paraphrasing, this could be the end of the state if this continues. And Iran's leaders are watching all this. Number one, they're saying, they're not reading the Bible, but they're thinking not biblically, but a house divided cannot stand. It's a biblical maxim. And the Iranians, they don't know it from the Bible, but they know enough to say they're divided. They're ripe for the picking right now. So they're looking at that. Then they're listening to comments from the likes of certain Israeli opposition leaders, and they're saying, now is the time. Ayatollah Khamenei, a few years ago, said that Israel, he wrote a book called Palestine. He said that Israel only has 25 more years to exist. That was, I believe, 6 years ago he said that, or 7 years ago. And he said, I had said 25, he said last week. I think it's even less. They're devouring themselves from within. That's what he said about Israel. Now, I do believe that Israel, and we've had, look, in an unprecedented manner, a reservist in the military refusing to report for duty. We had some of that. Israel seems to have gotten a handle on that now. But unprecedented times and developments in Israel, and not in a good way, sadly. And Iran sees all this. Now, I do believe that Israel, hey, externally, when these external enemies gather and the terror threats at the door, the vast, vast majority of Israelis, no doubt, will unite against the enemies, no doubt. But there is a faction that will continue to be a drain. It's not only in Israel, it's in every country in the world, really, in the Western world at least. There will be a faction of bitter enders who, even as the barbarians are at the gates and raining down rockets, will be more concerned with the Netanyahu government than they are the external enemies. They'll have more anger and protest against Netanyahu than they will Iran. Sad to say. I could say the same thing here in the United States, where some on the hard left have more anger against Trump and DeSantis than they do the likes of Iran, North Korea, the regime in Beijing. It's a sad fact. But so, yeah, there will be some of that. But I think the vast majority of Israelis know that this is an existential struggle. And when the rubber hits the road, Israel will come together. The concern is it, I don't want to say too late, because we know that Israel will always be, and it's not going anywhere. The people of Israel are there according to the word of God. Look at the book of Amos. Read the book of Amos, never to be uprooted again. So that ain't happening. But there is something to be said. Look at the Yom Kippur War in 1973, another precarious time for Israel when there was a mobilization kind of late in the game. And our reservists mobilized late in the game, and Israel prevails, no doubt. But do they take some lumps and some casualties that maybe they would not have had to take if they had been more ready and mobilized more quickly? Now, on one hand, Israel, no doubt, is on war footing. Hey, you've seen it here on the newscast, on the Watchman show on TBN. I've been with the Israel Defense Forces on live fire drills on the Lebanon border, on the Syria border, live fire tank drills day and night. I've been there. Hey, these guys are ready. The IDF is ready. They know the stakes, and they know what is coming. No one is naive, I think, in Israel to not know that, you know what? We did not go toe-to-toe with Hezbollah last week. Israel very well could have, by the way. Listen, the rockets were launched from southern Lebanon, which that's Hezbollah territory. Nothing happens there without the knowledge of Hezbollah. Israel retaliated against Hamas in southern Lebanon. They would have been well within their rights to retaliate against Hezbollah as well. Ismail Haniyeh, one of the leaders of Hamas based in Gaza, as these rockets rained down from southern Lebanon, he was in Beirut meeting with the leader of Hezbollah, Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah. Folks, I'm sure it was all just a coincidence, or not. So needless to say, there was Hezbollah coordination here, and their master in Tehran was the chief coordinator, the Iranian regime. So Israel, if Israel struck Hezbollah last week, they would have been well within their rights. They could have said, you know what? Hezbollah coordinated this with Hamas, and then Hezbollah tries to step back and have plausible deniability and say, hey, we didn't do it. We had nothing to do with it. At the same time, the political leader of Hamas is meeting with the leader of Hezbollah, yet we had nothing to do with it. They must really think that folks are pretty naive and stupid. And sadly, in many cases, they're right. when it comes to Western leadership and the way they approach these things, but I digress. But Israel could have, they didn't, but they know that the day of reckoning, I would say, folks, with Hezbollah is eventually coming, no doubt. I've called it here on the newscast, the Great Northern War. You might say, why that? Why Northern? I believe that it's going to start, and yes, send your questions. We're getting to the Q&A shortly. Send your questions along. I believe this Great Northern War will begin to the north in southern Lebanon and Syria. Syria mainly. Syria is where things I really believe may be sparked. So that's why I've called the Great Northern War. The bulk of the fighting will be there. Israel is going to be forced to once and for all deal with Hezbollah, Iran, and their proxies there in the north. But at the same time, we've called it a ring of fire, right? That's just part of the ring. The ring includes Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza to the south. It includes the Houthis in Yemen to the far south. It also includes various Iranian-backed Shia militias in Syria and Iraq to the east. It's a ring that surrounds Israel. I call it, again, the ring of fire. That entire ring of fire will be activated simultaneously during this Great Northern War. Now, the big question there, and Juliet Isaac, I'm looking at our chat right now. Juliet, you took the words out of my mouth. Is this the Psalm 83 war? My good friend Bill Salas wrote the book on Psalm 83, quite literally. I think he believes yes. I've gone back and forth on Psalm 83. Hey, I'm not infallible. Only God is. I've gone back and forth on Psalm 83. Has it been fulfilled in 1967, the Six-Day War? Is it a prophecy yet to come? There's a lot of different takes on that. And the main thing that's held me up, and I talked about this with Bill when I interviewed him here in the newscast a few months ago. I believe that aired in July 2022. Was it even around the July 4th holiday? Go in our archives under newscast. Check that out. The Watchman, Psalm 83. Probably do a search here and find it. Fascinating interview with my good friend Bill Salas. My hesitation with that has been Bill believes that Egypt and Saudi Arabia get involved. If I'm not mistaken, I don't want to misquote Bill, my good friend, a great guy, a brilliant prophetic mind. But I think Bill believes that Egypt and the Saudis and perhaps even Jordan are all involved in the Psalm 83 war that he projects. I find that hard to believe. Egypt, the Saudis, and Jordan, Sunni Arab nations, they fear, I'll use that word, fear the Iranian axis. So I'd find it unlikely that they come alongside Iran all of a sudden. If this thing's at the doorstep, that all of a sudden the Saudis and Egypt and Jordan come alongside Iran in a massive invasion of Israel and an onslaught against Israel. I find it more likely that it's who I just laid out, Iran's proxies. That said, you might say, wait a minute, Saudi Arabia and Iran are normalizing relations. Yes, we'll get to that in a minute. Doesn't mean Saudi is aligned with Iran. There's a big difference to have a non-aggression pact and to be openly aligned with a nation. But clearly, this war, whether it's Psalm 83, whether it's just a war, the Great Northern War, I believe that clearly there will be a war, a regional war, before the war of Gog and Magog, that kind of lays the groundwork for the Gog-Magog invasion as laid out in the book of Ezekiel, chapters 38 and 39. I believe there is a precursor war. Now, my good buddy Bill Salas believes that Psalm 83 will be that war, and perhaps it is. He calls it the inner ring of nations that surround Israel on its immediate borders, and he calls the war of Gog and Magog the outer ring of nations, Turkey, Iran, Russia, that aren't on Israel's immediate borders, although all of those nations right now are on Israel's border in Syria as we speak. I think another factor here is Isaiah 17, which says, look, that Damascus, one of the world's oldest inhabited cities, will become a ruinous heap and cease to be a city. So there's a lot going on here, folks, that it could very well be at the doorstep. Does that mean tomorrow? No. Would I be shocked if it was tomorrow? No, not exactly. But could it be 3 years, 2 years, a year, 5 years, 5 months? Who knows? Know this, that the prophetic chess pieces are moving on the board. I'm not in the business of predicting dates. Never have, never will. Only God knows. But you can see the signs. and you see the wars, the rumors of wars, you hear them. Very much Matthew 24 moment, the Olivet Discourse, when Jesus, Yeshua, laid out what to look for. I encourage you to go back and read Matthew 24 and then kind of read, I would say, Billy Graham used to say, a newspaper in one hand, a Bible in the other. Today will be your phone, your tablet, your laptop. But compare the headlines with the Bible and what Jesus talks about in Matthew 24, and you'll say, okay, it seems that time is short. Does short mean a year? What's your definition of short? Short could be 20 years. That's pretty short to me. The Bible says that to God, a day is like 1,000 years. So things are moving. Know that the chess pieces are moving on the board, and we're in perilous times. And as someone who loves Israel, obviously stands with Israel, God's land and God's people, who loves the United States as well, the country where I live, it can be very distressing. And I'm not immune to once in a while saying, oof, man, and getting a little down when I see everything that's going on. But then God jogs my memory and says, I'm still in control and I'm still on the throne. I get back into the Word. I get back into the Bible. Not that I ever leave, but I'll go right to it, go right to the Word, to lift my spirits, to be encouraged, to just be reminded, okay, God's got this. He is in control. And yes, some tumultuous times we'll have to live through. And yes, some nasty things will happen, but God will never leave us or forsake us. He will never leave or forsake his people. And before I talk about the Saudi factor and get to questions real quick, folks, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. If you're watching right now and you don't know him in a personal way, man, I can't think of a better time to say, you know what, I put it off long enough. And I said, well, next year is when I'll start following Jesus. I'm not ready yet, but next year, once I graduate school, get that job, move, get married, then I'll follow Jesus. No. He wants you as you are right now, and then he will transform you from within. And it's an amazing thing. It will be the greatest decision you ever made in your life. It's an amazing journey. Every day since I began following Jesus in 2009 has been an adventure. Every day I wake up and say, Lord, what do you have for me today? And if you don't have that anchor, if you don't have Jesus in your life, man, oh man, it's going to be very tough to withstand and weather the storms that are to come. But if your life is built on the rock, and that's Jesus, you'll get through it and then some. You'll survive and you'll thrive. So just a note there. And I always need to share that as we talk about these very heavy subjects. Last note before questions, talking about Saudi Arabia. Yes, today, breaking news here, finally getting to it. I think it's in our title of today's live stream. Yes, Iran reopened its embassy in Saudi Arabia today, number one. Yes, Iranian and Syrian officials are in Saudi Arabia right now meeting with Saudi officials about restoring ties. You might say, there you go. Saudi is now aligned with Iran. Hold the presses. They have been heated rivals for years and years. And yes, rivals can put aside differences to attack a common foe. Saudi has been very close behind the scenes to Israel over the past few years as well, because Saudi Arabia is so concerned about the rising Shia superpower Iran, a looming nuclear Iran, and its proxies. Saudi's approach, and we've talked about this on previous newscasts, but just to reiterate before we get to the questions, Saudi Arabia's approach here is, Iran lies right across the Persian Gulf from us. The U.S., who has historically been a close ally of ours, this is the Saudis saying this, is openly hostile to us right now. We can't rely on them. We can't rely on them to confront Iran's nuclear program. Number one, they're trying to cut a deal with Iran again. Number two, the U.S. seems divided. Number three, the U.S. has shown weakness on the world stage, whether it's clearly Afghanistan, China, Russia, Iran, the list goes on. So Saudi is saying, and Biden's been openly hostile to Saudi Arabia, to the Saudi royal family. So they're saying, I don't think we can count on the U.S. when it comes to Iran and these proxies that are at our borders right now. Then they look at Israel. And one of the reasons the Saudis have drawn closer to Israel over the past several years is because of Iran. That's the main reason. Where Saudi has said, or the Saudi royal family has said, okay, now Israel is the strong horse. We can respect them. They mean business. When they say they're going to take out Iran, we believe that they will. But now Saudi Arabia is saying, over the past 4 years, Israel has held 5 elections in 4 years. That doesn't seem too organized. It seems a bit chaotic. And now they see tens of, if not hundreds of thousands of demonstrators in the streets in Israel. They see a nation divided in their view. So they're saying, we can't count on the U.S. anymore. And they're saying, can we count on Israel? Is Israel too distracted by internal problems that perhaps we can't count on Israel either? And now Jordan has been more and more at loggerheads with Israel over the Temple Mount. Remember, Jordan is the custodian of the Temple Mount still. So Saudi Arabia is saying, well, when it comes to Iran, if we can't count on the U.S. and maybe we don't know about Israel, perhaps if you can't beat them, join them. Now, that doesn't mean literally join with Iran and align themselves with Iran. That's not what the Saudis are doing. I compare this to a non-aggression pact, meaning Saudi Arabia is saying, if you don't attack us, Iran, we won't attack you, and we'll try to calm things down with the Houthis, your proxy in Yemen. The Saudis are doing this, in my view, from a position of weakness. There's no doubt about it. And they're relying on Iran's word, basically. Saudi says, or the Saudis say, if you don't attack us, we'll normalize relations. And Iran saying, sure, okay, for now, we won't act against you, and we'll end the war in Yemen, where the Houthis, that Iranian proxy armed to the teeth, have been launching drones and rockets, not only against Saudi Arabia, but against the UAE even over the past few years. It's calmed down in the past few months, and now Iran is trying to end that conflict for now, with obviously the possibility that they can activate the Houthis whenever they want, including against Israel, as we mentioned earlier. So there you have it. You might not agree with it, but that's the thinking, I believe, in Riyadh among the Saudi leaders. You know, we're kind of isolated right now. We feel a bit alone, and Iran's at the doorstep. Well, maybe this non-aggression pact for now is the best way to go. Think what you want about it. I'm not saying it's the right. I don't think it's the right decision at all. I think it projects weakness on the part of the Saudis. I think it's a disastrous mistake by Saudi Arabia. But that's what they're thinking. Disaster, no doubt, but that's what they're thinking. And I bring that up just so you know, because people say, look, they're aligned with Iran. Just because you're opening an embassy in a country, once again, doesn't mean you're directly aligned with Iran. And there's so many differences theologically, ideologically, and elsewhere between the Saudi regime and the Iranian regime. So hold the presses. Hey, anything can happen in the Middle East. Expect the unexpected. But for now, I don't see that being in the cards. An alliance. It's different to have relations with a nation. You can have relations with a nation and not be aligned with them. Israel has relations with Russia right now still. They're not allies. I think you get my drift. Okay, let's go to the questions before we get out of here. Sorry for the shaky laptop as I'm pulling up the questions. What do we have? We always have some good ones. Oh, Crisco Duck, a fellow Philly native like me, good to hear from you. He asks, are the Watchman t-shirts available? You see the Watchman with Erick Stakelbeck on the back. It says, never hold your peace on the back. You may have seen there. They're cool. They're coming along with mugs, stickers, bump for your car, for your school bag, whatever. Also hats and hoodies. So we've got a good Watchman merch store that is coming very soon, Crisco Duck. I'm wearing this just as a little teaser for you guys. Some very cool gear. And I said last week, my 16-year-old and 12-year-old daughters both said, Dad, that's pretty cool. If I have them giving me the green light, it must look kind of cool. So they must have done a good job. Okay. Question also from Crisco Duck, as we're talking about it. Jack Hibbs, my good friend, who was on that Great Reset special, by the way. I interviewed Pastor Jack, who's got a great channel here on YouTube. You need to check out Real Life with Jack Hibbs. He will be on that Great Reset special Monday, April 17th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Pastor Jack said, and I saw this from Pastor Jack on Instagram today, the war against Israel has begun. Israel is at war right now. Is he correct? Yeah. I mean, I would say Israel is on war footing right now and in anticipation of a larger war, no doubt. You could say yes. You could say the war has begun. The probing, the war between the war is certainly going on right now. So yes, Israel calls it the war between wars. Iran considers it the war between the main storm that's coming. It's the gathering storm. So yeah, you're seeing right now the pieces moving and the groundwork being laid. Clearly, Israel is in a war mindset. Maybe not many of the protesters in the streets, but is Israel's leadership and Israel's military. They know what's coming. And again, not the actual war yet, as our friendly Paz Dotan, I just glanced, who's in Israel, just said. But we're there. We're at the doorstep. So Pastor Jack is right on the money. Good friend of mine who gets it 100%. He's right on the money here. Again, I don't know if this is next week, 2 months from now, folks. I have no idea. No one knows. But Matthew 24, check it out when you see the fig tree. So the signs are there. Okay, more questions here. And we're bringing it to you every day here on the newscasts, all the latest updates. And that's why we're glad that you're with us. Good question from Melissa Resnick. Do you think Israel will say or do anything as China is amping up its movements against Taiwan? Very interesting, Melissa. Kind of similar, not exactly in a geographic sense. But I was thinking about this today, Melissa, so I'm glad you brought it up. Folks, think about this. Similar a bit to the Russia-Ukraine situation, the China-Taiwan situation vis-a-vis Israel, in that Israel has relations with Russia, a decent relationship over the past 30 years or so, a pretty warm, good relationship with Ukraine. I don't know if it was warm, but a good relationship with Ukraine, decent relationship with Russia prior to February 2022. Key point there in the Russian invasion. Russia invades and Israel says, oh man, we're kind of between a rock and a hard place here, in that our hearts are with Ukraine. They've been invaded unjustly, in my view. I'm not saying Zelensky's a saint. That's not what I'm saying before I get all the comments. But Putin is an evil man, folks. And this invasion was unwarranted and unnecessary, 110% in my view. You can disagree, that's fine. It's a free country, at least still is here in the U.S. where I am, still, for now. And let's try to keep it that way. But at the end of the day, Israel their hearts were with Ukraine, but by the same token, they didn't want to ruin the relationship with Russia. Main reason for that, Russia is in Syria at Israel's doorstep, and Israel's concern, as we've discussed many times here in the newscast, is that Russia would basically declare a no-fly zone in Syria, and Israel would no longer be able to strike Iran and Hezbollah in Syria. Israel needs to have that freedom of movement in Syria to push back Iran. So they're saying, well, we're going to just kind of stay on the sidelines to a degree when it comes to Russia and Ukraine. Now, as we've documented here in the newscast, there are signs that may be changing. And I think Israel is sending a message. Russia is so closely aligned with Iran right now that Israel's saying, hey, you're aligning yourselves with our greatest enemy that's devoted to our destruction. Okay, two can play that game. Maybe we'll get a little closer to your enemy, Ukraine. So I think Israel's playing the game a little bit there. So that's one theater there. And we know that Russia, I call it the great betrayal, will eventually turn against Israel in a major way in the Gog-Magog war and actually lead that latter days invasion. Then you have China and Taiwan. Different in that, obviously, China is not at Israel's doorstep like Russia is right now. But China aligned very closely with Iran. As a matter of fact, China has a 25-year cooperation agreement with the Iranian regime, where Iran supplies China with cheap fuel and China supplies Iran with arms. Israel's not happy about that. And yet, much like Russia, Israel maintains a decent relationship with China. I wouldn't call it necessarily a warm relationship, but Israel has maintained pretty solid relations with China, which brings us to Taiwan. Folks, look, and the reason I was thinking about this today a bit is that China is going to move against Taiwan It's not a question, I believe, of if, but when. And I'm sad to say that. But whether you're Vladimir Putin, you're the mullahs in Tehran, you're Kim Jong-un in North Korea, or you're Xi Jinping in China, you're looking at the leadership in the White House right now, and you're smelling weakness. And you're saying, you know, I had planned to, if you're China, invade Taiwan in 2027. If you're Iran, you had maybe said, well, I planned to form this all-out assault against Israel in 2028. If you were Putin, maybe Putin originally, maybe his plan wasn't to invade Ukraine in 2022. Maybe he had originally seen 2024 or thought 2024. And then he saw Afghanistan and what happened there. And he saw weakness from the leader of the free world, the nation that has been the leader of the free world for the past several decades, the United States. Maybe China, Iran, and Russia are moving up their timetable, folks. And they're saying, man, wait a minute. Come November 2024, there's a possibility Biden will not be in office, and we might have to deal with Trump or DeSantis. That ain't good for our agenda. So maybe we should speed the timetable up and act now while we have this window of weakness in Washington. Folks, that's a very dangerous thing. Again, the elections here in the U.S. are November 2024. And if it looks like, if you're Russia, China, Iran, and it looks like perhaps Biden wouldn't be in office anymore, do you say, you know what? We should act sooner rather than later, whether it's Iran against Israel, whether it's Russia doing whatever Russia wants to do, whether it's China against Taiwan, whether it's even North Korea in some capacity. I think that's on the table. I don't think that's crazy to suggest. Brings us back to Melissa's question with Israel. Would Israel openly come out in support of Taiwan? I think it's very similar to the Ukraine-Russia situation. Yeah, China's not on Israel's direct border like Russia is right now, which makes it a much more precarious position. But China is a massive global player, a growing superpower, this regime in Beijing. And Israel, I would think, would not want to anger China just as it doesn't want to anger Russia. So that is an interesting question, Melissa, to see where Israel would come down on that. Again, their hearts would be with Taiwan, clearly, but would they wholeheartedly condemn China? We shall see, because I think that China will move. I don't know, maybe it's 2028, maybe it's 2027. But this week, China encircled Taiwan, and they simultaneously encircled Taiwan, a drill simulating an attack against Taiwan, and that's not the first time. So, hey, fasten your seatbelts. I'm so sorry. I only got to 2 questions here. Man, one last. Scooter Adventures asks, do you see Israel eliminating Hezbollah before the Ezekiel 38-39 war? Perhaps. Perhaps. Good point there, Scooter Adventures. I have said that when Israel, if and when, probably when Israel strikes Iran's nuclear facilities, it may make sense for Israel to also preemptively strike Hezbollah, because you know Hezbollah is going to respond to a strike against Iran's nuclear facilities. That may be the moment that the Iranian regime activates Hezbollah. It may make sense. I'm not a military strategist, and the people in the IDF know what they're doing, but it may make sense to also preemptively strike Hezbollah. Whew. Stay in prayer. Fasten your seatbelts. I'm so glad you're with us today. A lot going on. So it's an honor to be here with my watchmen and women on the wall. Hey, thanks so much for joining us here today on the live stream. Until tomorrow's newscast with Amir Sarfati of Behold Israel. You don't want to miss that. God bless, and remember, never hold your peace. Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Watchman Newscast. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss an upload, and tap the bell icon so you're notified every time a new video is posted. And don't forget to share your thoughts, insights, and comments below. Thanks for watching. We'll see you back here tomorrow.